Today's video, we're going to show you guys how to do different things with your EZPi or Octoprint setup, such as changing the host name, setting a static IP address, and changing advanced webcam settings. So let's get to it. So before we get started, you're going to need a couple of things. You're going to need to know the IP address of the EZPi or Octoprint setups that you want to do these changes to. You're going to need to download a terminal program. My recommendation, if you're on a Windows or Mac, is to use a program called PuTTY. We're going to be doing this on a Windows machine using PuTTY. If you want to learn how to find the IP address of your Raspberry Pi that's on the network that has your EZPi or Octoprint instance on it, there's a program called Advanced IP Scanner that you can use to scan your network and find all the IP addresses on your system. So the program I'm running here is called Advanced IP Scanner, and I have this installed on my computer, and there's a link in the video description. Now, this is assuming that your Raspberry Pi that you're using is on the same subnet as your computer. Typically, if you're on a home network, your Wi-Fi and your computer's Wi-Fi or hardwired Ethernet, whatever they're connected with, are on the same subnet. If you're not sure what subnet your computer is on, you can identify it a couple different ways. If you're on Windows, the easiest way is to open a run command. So if you hold down the Windows key and press R, you'll get the little run box here. And if you just type CMD, you'll get a command prompt. If you type ipconfig, you'll get a listing of all your adapters. Now yours will look different. I have multiple adapters on here, but you can see here, my IP address is in this range with a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. So this is a Class C subnet mask. Most home routers, unless you have a custom setup or something more advanced, you'll usually see these numbers will be 192.168.0. So I know my subnet is 172.16.21, and then I want to scan this. So I should type in up here 172.16.21.1-254, and this will scan my entire subnet. So I'm going to let this scan, and I'll show you guys how to figure out what exactly is your Raspberry Pi, because this program does decode the MAC addresses to give you an approximate information of what the manufacturer is. So I'm going to let this scan my network, and then we'll come back once it's done scanning. So you can see here my scan is almost done. We're at about 98%, and depending on the size of your network, it could take anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes to scan. But once it's done, you'll see the progress bar go to 100%, and this will go back to the play button instead of the stop button like it's showing now. So the scan's completed, and the first thing you want to do to identify where your Raspberry Pi is in terms of the IP address is click the little bar at the top here that says manufacturer. This is going to sort it by the manufacturer information, and luckily the Raspberry Pis show up as the actual manufacturer. So I already have a couple of machines here, and you can see these right here are labeled with Beta, E5+, Hack CR10. So I've already statically assigned these, and these are outside of what's called my DHCP range. And what that means is your router has a specific range of what it can use for handing out IP addresses for devices on your network, like your phones, tablets, computers. You want to make sure you're not going to put the Raspberry Pi, if you're statically assigning it, into the range of the DHCP range. But proper practice dictates that you should not be putting statically assigned devices in your DHCP range. So you should log into your router, and every router is different, so unfortunately I can't cover that. But you should be able to log into your router and look for something labeled LAN IP settings or something of that nature, and you should see settings for the DHCP server. Here on my networks here, I have the DHCP server allowed to hand out addresses from .100 through .199. So that means I can have up to 99 devices that are not statically assigned requesting an IP address from my router. Some routers will allocate the entire range aside from the IP address that the router's on, and others will have a small block just for DHCP. If I had a standard home router, I would show you guys what that looks like as an example, but we run a business grade firewall here, so it's way different than what you're going to see on your home router. I would refer to your router documentation to find out how to get to the address and get to that specific page. So if you are going to statically assign your Raspberry Pi, you need to make sure you're not putting that IP address in your DHCP range, because what could happen is in the future, if a device gets that same IP address from your router that your Raspberry Pi is on, you'll have lots of weird network communication issues with the Raspberry Pi and that device, because they're both going to be trying to talk on the same port. It would almost be like if somebody had the same phone number on phones and you're trying to talk over those, the wires are going to get crossed and the communication is going to get disrupted. That's not an exact representation of what happens, but the bottom line is you don't want to have two devices with the same IP address on your network, otherwise they will not work. So the Raspberry Pi I'm assigning is for the printer I just did a stream on a little while ago, and this has a fresh image, and I can see this is in my DHCP range. Remember I said my DHCP range goes up to 199. So I started all my other machines here at the 200 range. So you can see 200, 201, 203, so on and so forth. So looking at this, this also gives me a representation of what IP addresses are used. So I'm just going to make a note here that that printer is on 172.16.21.188, and your IP address of your Pi will be different. So I'm going to sort this by IP address, and you can see here, even though this is a Raspberry Pi, this machine does not have a MAC address that falls into that manufacturer ID. So that's why it's showing nothing for this. But you can see here, it is occupying the next space in my IP address block in terms of what I've assigned. So I've already decided that starting at 200 and going up from there, up until I get into other addresses, that's where my Raspberry Pis for my printers are going to sit. So my static address that I'm going to configure for my printer that we're working on in this video is going to use .209. Okay, so now we have our Raspberry Pi's IP address. I'm going to open up PuTTY, and there's a link to download this in the video description, so make sure you install and download this. If you need to install it, go ahead and pause the video now and unpause it when you get it installed. You can either type or just copy the IP address if you did type it out, and paste it or type it right into here. And again, this is your IP address, not mine. You need to find your IP address like we did in the step before this, before continuing. So I'm going to hit enter, and you'll see you'll get a PuTTY security alert. It's letting you know that this fingerprint for this Octoprint installation is not trusted, and this is normal. This will come up the first time you try to use SSH to connect into a Raspberry Pi. So go ahead and click yes, and if you're running the EZPi, you're going to have a different password from the standard Octoprint image. So this is an EZPi based one, so the login for the standard Octoprint image and the EZPi is just Pi, P-I. If you're using the EZPi image, the SSH password is capital E, lowercase z, capital P, 1.ssh. And if it's a Octoprint image, it's just going to be Raspberry, all lowercase. So now we're connected into the SSH interface for the Raspberry Pi. The first thing I'm going to do is change the host name. So to do that, I'm going to type sudo, S-U-D-O, space raspi, R-A-S-P-I, -config, C-O-N-F-I-G. And it's going to ask you to reconfirm your password. So it's the same password we use to log in. So it's the EZPi.ssh if you're using our image, or Raspberry if you're using Octoprint. Now when you're typing the password, you can see there's nothing showing on screen. So type it in and hit enter. If you type the wrong password in, it'll prompt you again. So to change the host name, which is how you can reference it easier instead of remembering the IP address, you can go down to network options, hit enter, make sure host name is selected, hit enter, and it's just going to tell you these are the letters you can use. So I'm going to acknowledge that. And then I'm going to use my backspace and get rid of Octopi. Now this printer is named Barney. So I'm going to type Barney, hit enter. I'm going to press my right arrow key twice, hit finish, and it's going to ask me to reboot now. Now, if this is the only change you're doing, you can go ahead and hit yes to reboot. When the Raspberry Pi restarts, it will now have the new host name. So I'm going to show you that right now. Now, once you hit yes, you'll see that the remote side has unexpectedly closed the network connection, and that's normal. So you can go ahead and just click OK, and then close out this window. It's going to take a little bit for that Raspberry Pi to restart, so I'm going to let it restart, and then I'm going to rescan the network to show you guys that it will no longer be showing Octopi for the host name, but it will be showing Barney. So my Pi's rebooted, and as you can see now, I knew my Pi's IP address was 172.16.21.188, and you can see now here Barney is showing for the name. And why this is nice is because if I run a command prompt, I can now type ping barney.local, and now it's replying back. Now I do have IPv6 enabled on here, so it's showing this, but you can also do what's called an NS lookup, and if I type Barney's IP address in, it'll tell me that this is Barney. What's nice is you can now access that printer. Instead of typing octopi.local, you can type barney.local. And now Chrome will automatically think you're searching, and then it'll say, hey, did you mean to go here? So you can just click that. And here we go. Now I have Barney's interface, and I don't have to remember its IP address anymore. So if this is all you're looking for, you don't need to set a static IP address. And this is a really nice feature because if you have multiple Raspberry Pis with Octoprint or the EZPi setup, they're all going to show up as octopi.local. So there's no way to differentiate them in terms of accessing them through this method. So just to show you guys, I can log in. So I'm typing my credentials in. And you can see here, we're logging into the Octoprint UI, and this is Barney. So I'm on the correct printer. Now the next step we're going to do is, like I showed here, I statically assign the IP addresses of my printers because I have other things connecting to the Raspberry Pis to control them, specifically Octofarm. So I do not want the IP address to ever change. So to do that, we're going to load PuTTY again. And I'm going to type in the IP address. You can also even type your host name. So I can show you this here, barney.local, hit enter. And because it's a different name, we're using the host name instead of the IP address, it's asking you the security alert again. So I'm going to click yes, type my login information. And now we're greeted with this. And if you notice, it says now pi@barney because that's the host name. So to set a static IP address, it's actually pretty simple. You just got to make sure you do it correctly. So in order to get the static IP address information correctly, you need a couple of things. You need the IP address you're going to use, the gateway information, which is usually your router's IP address, and a DNS server address, which is usually your router's IP address. If you have a router that does not provide DNS services, you can use an IP address such as Google's DNS, like 8.8.8.8 or 8.8.4.4. It's really up to you. And if you want to find that information out, you can also use the ipconfig command, except instead of just typing ipconfig, you do a /all, and you'll get more information. So if I look at my computer here, I can see my gateway is 172.16.21.254, and so is my DNS server. Now, I want to make sure the IP address I'm using is not already in use, because if I put two devices on the same IP addresses, we're going to have issues. Now, according to my IP scan, it looks like the next IP available in the range that I want to use for my printers should be 209. So to verify that, I'm going to do a ping command followed by the IP address that I want to use. And then I hit enter. So if you see an error like this, destination host unreachable, this is a good indication that this IP address is free. Now, this is assuming all your devices are on that are on your network, and a device that would be using this IP address is connected and powered on. Just to give you an example, if the IP address was used, I know 208 is used by my Kingroon machine. If I hit ping and put its address in, you can see I'm getting a reply back here. I'm going to put Barney on 172.16.21.209, and this is whatever address you want that is in your subnet range. So this is whatever you want that is in your range for your local network. So to set this address, you're going to type sudo nano/etc/dhcpcd.conf. And if you want to make sure you typed it correctly, if you hit tab, you should see the cursor move over one space. So go ahead and hit enter and reconfirm your password. This is the same one you typed to log into the Pi. And now you should see this screen. Now you want to go ahead and page down 1, 2 times, and you should see here example static IP configuration right here. We're going to need to uncomment a couple lines. The first one being interface ETH0, static IP address, skip the IPv6 one, and then static routers and static domain name servers. And you can see here they have some examples in there. Now, the first one I want to change is this address. So they give you an example here of 192.168.0.10/24. The /24 tells the printer what subnet mask to use. Now, I am using a class B address, but I am using a /24 subnet mask. Now, if you remember, I said I wanted to use the 209 address for Barney, because that's the next available one. So I'm going to type that in here. So you can see here, make sure you have all your periods and everything correct. And the /24. Most of your home networks are going to be a /24. So it should look like this, except this right here should be your IP address you want to put the printer on. Now for the routers, you want to put your router address in here, in my case, and it ends in 254. And my DNS server is also my router. And this is the case for most routers, even your home ones. So I'm going to put this in. So there we go. I have my DNS server address, my router address. If you don't put these in, your Pi will not be able to get out to the internet. If you don't want your Pi to be able to get out to the internet, then I believe you can just leave this blank or put 0.0.0.0 in here. But I do want my Pis to be able to get out to the internet so they can pull down updates. So the last thing you do is do a Control-O, and it'll ask you file name to write. Just press Enter, and then do a Control-X, and it'll take you back to the screen. What I usually like to do now is I want to run a ping command, and if you add a -T at the end, this will do a continuous ping instead of just 4. So what this will do when I reboot the Pi, and to do that you do sudo reboot, and then the Pi will reboot. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK and close this putty window out. And once the Pi reboots and takes on the static IP configuration, we'll start seeing replies in a second here because the Pi is now rebooted and it's using that static IP address. So you'll get timeouts until the Pi comes back up and brings its network interface up. So you can see there, we're getting a reply now, and that tells me that the Pi has taken the static IP configuration and I'm able to communicate with it, which means my settings are correct on here. Now, one thing I do want to note is when you do a static IP configuration, depending on how your router's set up, it may not resolve that hostname address, meaning you're not going to be able to type, like in my example, barney.local. You would access it from the IP address. It really depends on your router and how it's handling the hostname resolution. Some routers will resolve even static mappings if it knows that those devices are on the network, and other routers will not because they're not aware of it because it's not getting a DHCP address from your router. So I can see Barney's replying, so I'm going to go ahead and close that out. And the last thing I want to do is show you guys webcam configuration options. So I'm going to go ahead and type my new IP address in, which is 172.16.21.209, and hit enter. And again, because we changed the IP address, we're getting a warning. Go ahead and click yes and log in. Now, if you are using an Octoprint image or even our image and you want to change your password, it's as simple as typing PASSWD, and then it will prompt you for the current password and then allow you to put in a new password. And again, it won't show you anything. So you can see here, I entered the same one in for both, and it says password unchanged. I don't want to change the password because these aren't accessible outside of my network, but it is a good idea to change the stock password. So there you go. I just exited out of that because I don't want to change my password. Now, for the webcam options, you can actually configure these through the SSH interface. And by webcam options, I mean what resolution you want to run and what frame rate. Now, for our print farm, because I don't want to take up a ton of bandwidth between here in the shop, I actually run our printers at a 720p resolution with a frame rate of 4. It helps conserve bandwidth, and it also helps conserve resources on the Raspberry Pi itself. So to do this, you can type sudo nano /boot/octopi.txt and hit enter. It's going to ask you to reconfirm your password. And now you're in the configuration options. Now, if you see here, you can tell it if you want to use a USB or the Raspberry cam. You can just leave this alone. It's smart enough to identify what it wants automatically. Now, in our EZPi image, we've already set the resolution to 720p, and the default frame rate for our image is 10. But on the stock Octoprint image, it'll look like this. It'll be commented out. So if you want to set your own options, you can go ahead and uncomment this and set your resolution here. So resolution is set by a -R followed by the resolution. Now your camera has to support the resolution. You can't just tell it to do a 1080p resolution if you only have a 720p camera. So you need to make sure the camera that you're using, whether it's a Raspberry Pi camera or a USB camera, actually can support the resolution you're going to ask it to. If you do this and it's a resolution that's not supported, your camera's probably not going to work until you change it. So, and this is literally just as simple as typing in the resolution. So like I said, I want 1280 by 720, which is a 720p resolution, and the -F here dictates the frame rate. So remember I said I like to conserve bandwidth, so I have my frame rate set to 4 on this machine. You can change it to whatever you want, as long as it's within the bounds of your camera. So if your camera can do 720p at 30 frames per second, you can do that. However, that's going to put more load on your Pi. So you're just using it to monitor your printer. I would recommend doing no more than 10 frames per second, which is why it's the default for our image. And then change that. And again, Control O, it'll ask you to confirm the file name. You can just hit enter, and that's it. You'll see it says wrote 74 lines. So now I can hit Control X to get out of this, and you have to reboot the Pi for these changes to take effect. So now that I've rebooted the Pi, it's going to go ahead on the next startup and give me the new webcam settings that I just set, the frame rate I just set, the IP address, and the host name. So those settings are now hard-coded into that Pi and will not change on reboots. And this is the process we go through on our machines here. So I hope this video was helpful for you guys to show you how to set a static IP address, change your Pi's host name, and set advanced camera options for your printer. If you guys like this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We have fun live streams and other sort of tips and tricks videos on our channel all the time. If you guys don't have an Octoprint set up already, we do have a fully pre-set up Pi kit called the EZPi in our shop, and there's also a link for that in the video description. Sales from our shop allow us to do videos like this and the other fun live streams, so if you guys want to support us, I'd really appreciate it. So I hope you guys learned something, and as always, happy printing.